I'm so glad to be here tonight. Thank you so much to Blake and Evan and Julio for holding this space. I'm really excited to connect tonight about talking about the three doorways to liberation. I'm Patrick Brown. I thought I'd share just a little bit about myself before we get started. And one of my favorite things about this community is really also to have a little bit of time for fellowship. So I'll share that I'm from Chicago, born and raised, and I came to California about 15 years ago or less, really after having a lot of trouble burning out of a nonprofit job, right? I was committed to social justice, racial equity, but I had extended myself in such a way that it just had burned up all my inner resilience and resources. And I often tell the story that one of the first things I did was like the California thing where you go on a retreat. So I did that at Spirit Rock. It was the POC retreat, and my heart broke open. And all of these amazing things that I had stuffed down inside of me started to come out, and it was really scary and terrible. So my doorway to the Dharma was actually through this breaking point. And then Mary Yang, who's one of the founders of EBMC and Spring Washam, talked to me about the meditation center. He offered me some tools in the retreat. I got introduced to the Dharma that way, and I have been on it ever since. So I just like to share kind of my entrance and doorway to the Dharma was through burnout and struggle and suffering. And since then, I've really made a commitment to myself. I was like, why aren't these tools available for everybody? Everybody needs these, especially people of color, especially queer people. I've made a commitment to myself to understand and deepen my understanding of the Dharma so I can share. So I'm so honored to be in front of each of you tonight to offer something that I hope will be useful in the teaching. So times are unprecedented. The world has never experienced a pandemic on this global level like this way. There are so many challenges for those of us that are in the Bay around the air. The resilience required to move through days where you can't breathe is taxing, to say the least, and really stressful amongst the continued racism that we experience through the state-sanctioned murder and violence against Black people and people of color. It's adding up, to say the least. And when I was invited to speak tonight, I just wanted to throw myself into something that is a little bit new. And I had been thinking about the warrior moon that is tonight. And I was like, what is the resilience and what is the path to liberation? And so I landed on this talk centered around the three doorways to liberation. It's taught in many traditions. The particular lineage that I was reading from and studying with is from the Plum Village and Thich Nhat Hanh tradition. But tonight I'll just be offering some thoughts and reflections. I hope that they land with, hope the impact is as I intended to be. It was just a place to begin thinking and reflecting about our own liberation. Within this teaching, it's made up of basically three pieces. The Buddha says that we may explore the three doorways to liberation by examining emptiness, signlessness, and aimlessness. I'm going to start with just talking about what emptiness means, and the Pali term is shunyata, and it has more to do with interconnectedness than emptiness. So as I read and I understood that the way that we perceive and the way that we look at things, there's an opportunity to notice the interdependence of ourselves and all the objects. So the same way that a plate is empty of food, the practice of looking at things for where they are connected, right? The relationship between them. So it isn't emptiness as in like without having anything, but it's about what is the practice we can endeavor into that will allow us to see the relationship between things, not just the absence, but the relationship between what possibly could fill that emptiness. So throughout the day, we look at deeply at objects, right? So the bowl is empty until it is filled. The glass is empty until it is filled with water. And finding an emptiness that invites in a connection or relationship to something else. So I thought this was interesting, the emptiness that I sometimes experience in my spirit, right? I feel like, oh, where's the thing that will fill me up? Is it relationship? Is it connection? Is it food? But just taking a moment to think about emptiness in relationship to how it allows us to see the interconnectedness of beings. So I'll invite in we could look at objects every day and look for their emptiness. We could also consider the sky, right? Is the sky empty without clouds? Is it empty without the sun? What is the opportunity to see the emptiness elected or connected to what would fill that emptiness? And we start to be able to generate this feeling of the emptiness as an invitation to explore interdependence again. It's a scary practice. And as I began to work with it not that long ago, I found that, it was getting tight in my chest. And there's the fear of exploring emptiness that will reveal that there is nothing behind it. There, for me, was the fear of exploring emptiness and noticing, before I could find the interdependence, I'd just see the empty plate. And that felt so scary to me. But as I sat and continued to work with that practice, I started to feel, a little bit of imagination, a little bit of like bringing my concentration and attention towards an object. Notice to notice what that emptiness could invite. And it started immediately to be connected to other objects and related to other things. So in the middle, the Buddha said that this practice is determining that there's a middle way between the existence of things and the non-existence of things, that there's a place to look for emptiness and interdependence and relationship between those things. There was a reference in the book that I was reading to the Diamond Sutra. It said that we are thoughtful humans. We're not interdependent of other species. And so in order to protect ourselves, we've got to protect other non-human species, right? So this extending of the emptiness exploration into beyond the objects, but into ourselves. Where is there opportunity to notice our interrelationship with other beings and other species? I'm going to read for a moment from the text that I was reading, which is the heart of the Buddha's teaching. And Thich Nhat Hanh says that when we first hear about emptiness, we feel a little frightened. Emptiness is looking deeply. We can see that the flower is made of non-flower elements, that there is light, space, clouds, earth, and consciousness. It's empty and separate, but independent to itself. And if we begin to notice the interdependence between human and non-human species, we know that if we pollute the water and the air, the vegetables and the minerals, we are destroying ourselves. We have to learn to see ourselves in things that we thought were outside of ourselves in order to dissolve house boundaries. So again, the practice of finding the relationship and the interdependence between what can appear empty and other relational objects to that emptiness is really to start to take in the practice of that interdependence. And once we have that in our minds, we start to notice that in every space, that we are interdependent with other beings, we're interdependent of each other, we're interdependent in so many aspects of our life. The second doorway for liberation in this practice is called signlessness, or amiyata. This has to do with labeling and the way that we can assign labels to things that feeds into a delusion. Right. So an example that is offered often is for water. So water, when it's cold, is ice, and when it's hot, is steam. And whether it's a solid or gas has to do with the conditions surrounding it. So how are the things that we label can be different under relatively similar or different separate conditions? Signlessness is understanding that labeling something or somebody in the action of labeling it is limiting it. All of the things that we label and we name, we create signs for, are made up of smaller things, right? The flower is made up of a stem, which is made up of petals. Each of those will eventually break down, and you've got this moisture, this water, and this like plant cellular material. So is the flower, or is it made up of those other things? And if we, by assigning it a name and a label of a flower, like, are we losing the opportunity to notice what is within it? So I extrapolate from there, quoting from the Diamond Sutra, wherever there is a sign, there is deception and illusion, right? The labeling often of an object can tell us about the practice or the person that is creating that label or that sign than it does about the actual object. What would it mean to invite in the exploration of not using labels that way? How could you begin to look at that same flower and not notice only the pieces of it, and not notice it as its totality as a flower, but notice beyond that it is a combination of energy and light and water. And if you're able to do that, could you do the same with another person, right? There's a lot of exploration around identity within the Dharma, and I think this invitation of signlessness calls us in to say, beyond this body, which will not last, what is Patrick? What are the pieces that make me up? And if you can see past this label of this identity that I've formed, could you notice the smaller pieces, the atoms, the water, the bones, the smallest pieces of me? And then could that give you a different perspective on who I am? Because those conditions that, same that they create the ice or they create the flower, there are conditions that have created me. And if those conditions change, I will change. So the invitation again is just to notice where we are creating more suffering for ourselves by creating these labels. Again, to that piece, like looking at the pieces of an object that we label can really help to pull apart the way that we can sometimes be unintentional or mindless when we notice an object or a thing. And actually spending time combing through, just noticing right now, objects that we could break apart into smaller pieces. If nothing will remain, if this bell will eventually deteriorate, if that blanket will eventually deteriorate, could I see beyond just the label that I've created for it as bell or blanket or phone? And within that practice, might there be some liberation or some freedom available? Yeah. Then I'll read again from the book. Thich Nhat Hanh says, until we can break through the signs, we cannot touch reality. As long as we are caught by signs, round, square, solid, liquid, gas, we will all suffer. Nothing can be described in terms of just one sign, but without signs, we feel anxious. Our fear and attachment arise from our being caught in the signs. Until we touch the signless nature of things, we will continue to be afraid and suffer. Before we can touch H2O, we have to let go of signs like squareness, roundness, heaviness, lightness, up, down. Water is in itself neither square nor round nor solid nor gas. When we free ourselves from the signs, we can enter the heart of reality. But until then, we can see this ocean in the sky, and until we can see the ocean in the sky, we are still caught by these signs. It's a difficult practice, and it seems a little bit out there for me. But as I've worked with it, I have noticed that there is I can feel a little bit of loosening in myself if I don't assign what I typically would label something an object, but I start to look deeper into it, into its pieces, and realize that it is impermanent. So I'll just invite folks to try that practice on and see how it feels. The third doorway into liberation is aimlessness, aparanhita. So this is the practice of, being with what we are. Nothing to do, no plan, no goals to achieve. Does the sky have a purpose? Does the tree have a purpose? Or are they just being what they are? And if they don't, then why would we? So what is the purpose? What if the purpose for your life was related more to being yourself, exploring that, and then feeling joy, right? What if the things that you do, you set up a life, you were to set up a life where you were remaining present in each moment, practicing gratitude, mindfulness. When I read this passage, I was thinking about just the ways that we get caught into the hamster wheel, right? The delusion that we're here for the production of materials or production of capitalism. The idea that we might just be here to exist and to be was really frightening to me. I am somebody who's been socialized, as most of us have in this Western dynamic, to believe that we have to be a part of something, we have to be contributing to something in order to generate our value. And if that isn't true, then what is that? What am I left with? So I'm not trying to circumvent the very strong reality of how we show up in our world, and I need to pay bills and I need to participate. But if there's a way to invite in a little bit of this aimlessness, of this not having to have a prescribed trajectory or not having to have a prescribed way of being and showing up in life, I wonder what else would be possible. If you were to practice that aimlessness just for 5 minutes a day, walking with no destination in mind, sitting with no purpose in mind, this thing of sometimes ask students, why do you practice? Do you believe that you will awaken in this lifetime? And if not, then why do you practice? What is the usefulness of just being present and just being? If you were to bring a little measure of that into your life and practice it just a little bit, could it expand your ability to feel some cessation of suffering, to feel some freedom, to feel some liberation? Losing our attachment to expectations and how we strive in the world could invite in more space for that liberation and the practice of gratitude. So the last piece that I'll read is about this third and final doorway of liberation. He says, someone asked me, aren't you worried about the state of the world? I allowed myself to breathe, and then I said, what is more important is not to allow your anxiety about what happens in the world to fill your heart. If your heart is filled with anxiety, you will get sick, and you will not be able to help. There are wars, big and small, in many places, and that can cause us to lose our peace. Anxiety is the illness of our age. We worry about ourselves, our family, our friends, our work, and the state of the world. If we allow worry to fill our hearts, sooner or later we will get sick. And that piece just resonated with me really well. Somebody who really wants to help. And in that effort, I extend myself in ways that I know reinforce the delusion of separateness, and in so many ways become challenging because I connect myself to that idea that I've got to do in order to have value, to be loved, or to be grateful for my life in a way that helps others. So noticing the power of Sangha, the power of collaborative practice in the Dharma, May all of the merit that was generated tonight in our work and in our practice, may that merit move from this circle of folks into a larger area of California. May that merit be driven towards the cessation of suffering for those experiencing homelessness, those impacted by the fires, those fighting for their liberation. And may that merit be divided amongst all beings in every direction.